Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we got another unscripted movie review on the docket, this time of the new film, the directorial debut of Bradley Cooper, A Star is Born. You know, as both a music critic and something of a movie critic as well, it puts me in a bit of an awkward situation to talk about movie musicals, especially like this, because you'd think that I'd have expertise in both fields, it would overlap effectively. At some point, I think that is at least a little bit true. I at least know what this movie is trying to do. And hell, going back to go revisit A Star is Born for the fourth time, as this is the third remake of this film, you would think that there would be an open question to take where this material is going now, where this is ultimately going to be taking to retell A Star is Born in 2018. Because again, this is a movie set in the modern times, and the context of which The Star is Born was originally made, and then remade again, it's changed significantly, hell, even since the 1970s when it happened the last time. And to have this conversation, we need to talk about the dichotomy between pop music and rock music. Hell, you've already seen this. It's been talked over, it's been discussed to death. There's the rockist critics versus the poptimist critics. That's always typically described in some vein, and I typically fall somewhere in the middle. The whole thing that comes out of a lot of this dichotomy is that rock music is the rootsy music. It's got the soul, it's got that firepower, it's got that energy. Whereas pop, it's more shiny, it's more manufactured. It's certainly catchy, it serves its purpose, but it's disposable. In 2018, I'm not sure that dichotomy is true anymore, because rock music, as we've seen time and time again, by so many different rock documentaries, and you go even further, realize how much rock music really is just assembled in a studio like pop is. You see that thicker element of grit starts to wear a little thin on that side. And you get to the pop side, well, there are people in pop music who are considered just as auteur driven as rock is often presumed to be. And the fact that they are trying to reinforce that dichotomy in 2018 is already a little bit weird out of the gate. So I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, so let's talk briefly around the plot here, because you know what? You know the plot. It's A Star is Born. This is the third remake of the damn film. You have an aging rock star who's realizing through a lifetime of drug abuse and alcohol abuse that he's falling off, and then he finds that star, that wonderkin who could potentially revive something of a career, even though he kind of feels like he's falling head over heels in love with her and that the career kind of happens by accident. And then she blows up as a pop star, moves in that direction, and well, the jealousy happens, there's a clash of egos, and you all know where this is going from here. This is a pretty conventional plot line. It's been done a number of times before, even outside of the Star is Born narrative. Hell, I think they ripped most of that off for Rock of Ages. And you know what? There are things to praise about this movie, even besides the questions of relevance and my issues with the screenplay, in which we will get into at length. I think there are things that I like about this movie that I think ultimately make it a good film, if a fair number of steps away from being a great one. For one, you'll realize very quickly out of the gate, this is an actor showcase for Bradley Cooper as the writer, director, star, and what he's presenting himself as. And you know what? In terms of the acting and the performance that he's trying to give, I'll come back to my big issue with it when I realized about midway through the film what was kind of throwing me off about his performance, but honestly, it is a good performance. And I'll say this for Lady Gaga, if this is the movie that's allowing her to come out as an actress in this lane, she's really convincing. She's always had a great voice when she's singing live, and she's got a lot of presence and firepower as a performer that's always translated on her albums and translates even further here. And she's got the comfort in both rock-ish material and pop-ish material to actually fit within the crossroads really well. She's really well cast, and frankly, even if I go to the supporting characters, the big one is being Sam Elliott, that came right the hell out of nowhere, but I'm happy he's here. At the end of the day, there is the component parts for this to work too. Hell, even go to the soundtrack. I started talking a little bit about this on Billboard Breakdown. The pedigree of the writers they brought behind this is pretty high. You got Laurie McKenna, you got Natalie Hemby, you have Jason Isbell, and they're writing some rootsier songs that honestly, in the first third of this movie, even if you can predict where the arc is going, it's actually really satisfying in terms of a lot of the actual musical performances. Even if Bradley Cooper is a little bit too obsessed with the shaky cam that's a little bit too close to the instruments or the singers' faces in order to capture emotion, there really should be some sweeping shots or some wide shots in order to capture the scale and scope of those performances, but that's a different question. discussion, and we will get to more directorial issues in a bit. But honestly, I think we have to start at the music because this is a musical after all, and where I've observed the first, let's call it a problem, especially when you consider the whole rock and pop dichotomy. Because when you got your rock, really more heartland rock alternative songwriters coming like Jason Isbell, that's pushing more really of a country angle than anything else in that lane, you immediately notice there's a certain massive disparity in quality when you take a look at the pop songwriters and you have Julia Michaels. Yeah, if you want to illustrate the levels of which rock is just on a different tier than pop, I guess that's one easy and cheap way to do it, but at the same time it kind of strips out some modern complexity, because if you got good pop songwriters, get Jack Antonoff, get Max Martin in the room, you could actually come up with some pop hits that are on a similar tier as the rock material that's being put forward. And I think that's important to actually say, because the framing very much wants to say that earnest heartland rock sound is entirely what is in the right, because the second you go for the pop sellout mode, where she changes her hair and she goes on, she blows up with her life, but she blows up within a pop artifice, is that it's artificial. And that's not as same, it doesn't have that same rootsy power to it. And we are on some level supposed to take Bradley Cooper's side, even as he's self-abusing himself. And I get that at some points the element of nuance is that he might not entirely be a reliable narrator, and he should just get the hell out of the way and let her do what she's supposed to do until the ending happens, and then where that is taken to its logical conclusion, and you start realizing that, oh, that's how that's going to be framed. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself there. I think if this movie wanted to have some degree of nuance within its framing, it should have tried to place them on an equal playing field when it comes to the music, or when it comes to their performances in the screenplay as actors. Bradley Cooper, it's hard not to feel like he directed himself to be the rock star and really the star and epicenter of the movie. Because Lady Gaga, while she puts on a great performance, the screenplay doesn't exactly give her a lot of internal life of her own and beyond her relationship with Bradley Cooper and really the father figures in her life. It's a really awkward thing where you realize that the only internal life she has is caring for guys who are in some form of arrested adolescence and who are falling apart. And that's a little bit messed up in its own way, how much she has to try to coax through their egos. And if this movie wanted to make this a commentary on toxic masculinity and ego, that'd be a different conversation, but that's not exactly happening much either. There are points where Bradley Cooper is trying to reconcile with his feelings, but at the same time, you do know where he's most comfortably framed is when he is being that rock star, and that's what's being framed as being most attractive to her. And yeah, there's something a little bit iffy about the fact that when he wants to be able to pull her on stage for the first time, and it's that one big dramatic moment where she comes out and she actually begins to claim that stardom that she rightly deserves, it's from him taking fragments of her song, putting an arrangement behind it, and then trying to coax her up, saying, "Oh, come on, I got it all set up for you. I'm gonna play it anyway, so if you don't come out, it's your loss." Like, that whole element where, as much as she's saying no and trying to encourage any sort of comfort with it, whereas he's just gonna be swaggering and just do it anyway, it feels, well, the way somebody treats your art like that, it just feels a little bit on the morally gray side, but not exactly in a way that reflects well on the current climate. That's all I'm saying. But on the topic, we have to keep circling back to the current climate because it becomes such intensely distracting in this film. Bradley Cooper's character, the only way he functions and works is if he was a country artist or a heartland rock artist in some point in the 80s. So, okay, then that's 30 years later, he would be in his mid-50s there. He had his blow up around the late 80s, very early 90s. There was an audience for that around that time, likely more in country than in rock, because around that time you would have had the major grunge push. But I get the arc that takes him to where he is, and he's clearly trying to play himself up as being a lot older than he is, but this is where you run into the realization I had. He's playing Jeff Bridges from Crazy Heart. I'm sorry, that's what he's doing with his affectation, with his mood, with the rampant alcoholism. That's clearly what he's trying to play, and sadly, I'm not sure that Bradley Cooper has the weight and gravitas that can really come from having lived that time and era to step into that lane. And that raises a significant point surrounding the inner life of a character. I already said this about Lady Gaga, and that I know what role she plays in the story, but beyond that, as a human being, it's hard to get a lot more of a handle of what drives her and what elements beyond her character, really beyond her outfits. And when I take a look at Bradley Cooper, I see a lot of the same issues. Yeah, he would have come up in the 80s and 90s as a rock star, but at the same time, what was inspiring him to write those songs? A guy who has lived that long and lived that hard within rock probably has a history with women, probably has a kid or two, given how reckless and wild that would have been coming out of the 80s and 90s. And you get the sense that while there is some element of history between him and his older brother, there isn't a lot more inner life surrounding his history that makes me want to gravitate onto his character, almost to feel a little bit like a Cypher. Not helped by the music, which in terms of a lot of the Heartland rock, and I know this is probably a music critic thing, I can tell when it's a Jason Isbell song versus a Natalie Hemby or Laurie McKenna song. So when I hear him sing from those various artists, you can't believe that that guy wrote a cross-selection of those songs with such a distinctive writing style as the songwriters actually have, which makes him comes across as even more like a Cypher, someone singing somebody else's work, and that doesn't help him. But as a whole, there are other nitpicks I can make, like how a man at his age, coming up the way he did in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, the fact that he refuses to wear inner ear monitors, or that is treated like a sign of growing older, that's absolute bullshit. And it was clearly written by somebody who doesn't grasp that a man playing that kind of rock in that era, he might have been reckless coming out of the 80s and 90s, but you protect your goddamn ears. That would have been standard practice even in that era. That just blew my mind a little there. But at the same time, what bothers me the most here is you have to circle back to the questions of why this movie was made. Why remake The Star Is Born with its arc of setting rock against pop, and with rock at this level of authenticity, with pop with this degree of artifice? Guy pulls her in, and then she goes towards pop, which is probably a natural fit for Lady Gaga, which is a hard thing for me to ignore given that's where she came up in pop. I look at her, I see Lady Gaga, she's comfortable in that lane, and she's more responsible for giving that lane some level of artistic credibility, treating it more as an auteur in that lane. I see that question of why this movie is made, and then you realize, oh, it's an actor showcase. This is for Bradley Cooper to win a Best Actor nomination. Or to get, I can't see him getting Best Director because honestly, there's enough jerky elements in the pacing, and there are specific spots that I don't think reflect the best usage of how he moves his more handheld camera. There's some beautiful shots, individual shots, but in terms of overall continuity, the film jumps around a lot, and in terms of montage construction, it can feel a little slapdash at points, and there are definitely points where another cut or a wider cut should be better framed, and Bradley Cooper doesn't do so. It definitely has the rough around the edges of an independent film that doesn't exactly work when it's trying to tell this big swelling musical story as it kind of has to. But beyond that, it's clear that Bradley Cooper's trying to sell this as an actor showcase for him to get a Best Actor nomination. I'm not sure this gets him there because he's not Jeff Bridges playing Crazy Heart. When you realize that, and you realize the narrative issues and the structural issues, and you also come to realize that in terms of pop, like, I wish this movie had aged out of the 70s, even with some elements of the 70s, even going back to there, while we might not have known to the same degree that there was already crossbreeding between rock and pop in that industry. Like, it didn't work in the 70s with Chris Christopherson and Barbra Streisand, but taking the same gender dynamics, taking that same element and moving it now to 2018 makes even less sense. And the final thing, and this bugs me specifically around the final stages of the movie, the main character, Bradley Cooper's character, is told that even as he's on the road to recovery, he could get better, but he can't go on tour with Lady Gaga, with the pop star Lady Gaga's character. Lady Gaga did an album with Tony Bennett in 2014. This was fairly modern, and when you realize that on some level she's fitting into that pop iconography archetype, where it's hard not to see her as Lady Gaga in that lane there, you start realizing, oh wait, there's a massive logical loophole, and given how much crossbreeding inbreeding there is between older artists in that lane and the amount of respect is currently given to a legacy artist in that lane, because again, he's clearly drawing an audience of some type, which honestly makes me question why he still takes those more side paid gigs at all. Because again, it's open questions of, I know why it's there in the story, but it doesn't exactly make sense for a rock star of his type and swell that he still needs to do those side gigs, but whatever. It forces you to confront with the fact that this movie doesn't make a lot of sense in the time period that it is, telling the story that it is. So you start asking the question why it's made in order to tell this story, and you go back to, oh wait, it's for Bradley Cooper to try to win his Best Actor role, and frankly, I'm not sure it's good enough to get there. I'm sorry. But as a whole, look, again, there are elements I like about this movie. A lot of the music's pretty good, even if it can feel discombobulating in terms of the way it's set up and framed. There's elements about the narrative I don't like that's jerky, but at the same time, Lady Gaga and Sam Elliott make the best out of their characters and what they can. Bradley Cooper, I even say, is pretty good too in terms of what he's trying to sell, and he's got good chemistry with Lady Gaga. But this movie is at its best when they have their low-key artistic chemistry. Oh, that was clearly my favorite parts of the film, but at the same time, this should be better than it is. With the pedigree behind it, and with the amount of money and marketing behind it, and especially considering the sort of story they are adapting, it makes you question whether or not that story should have been adapted, period. And it makes you question whether or not Bradley Cooper framing it the way it was the right way to do it. Ultimately, I think the answer to both those is probably not, but at the end of the day, I'm giving this a solid 6 out of 10. You know what? This should be for me. It should absolutely be for me. The fading rock star revitalizing an upstart pop star, working entirely in the music industry in that scene. It feels like somebody trying to write a story about music, but not someone who truly grasps how music has changed in 40 years. And that, to me, gets distracting, and that kind of took me out of the film. It's not bad. It does hit some emotional moments that I appreciate, and again, if this is the point where Lady Gaga can step out as more of an actress, I think she earns that. I think she can step into that role very effectively. Certainly better than whatever she was doing in that Sin City sequel, which I think she was in. Beyond that, check it out if you're curious. It's probably going to get a lot of nominations, specifically for Best Actor for Bradley Cooper, but I don't think he deserves to win for this one, because beyond that, it's alright. But this star might blaze out pretty quick. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Yeah, this movie frustrated me. I don't think it's bad, but it does frustrate me in terms of narrative structure, in terms of trying to fit this within a very modern music industry setting, and how really the narrative should have been retrofitted considerably to actually make that work. It's trying to tell a very specific arc with the people they got behind it, and I'm not sure. The second you start thinking about it and placing any sort of context of reality surrounding the modern music industry, it doesn't exactly connect, but fine, whatever. And a lot of people don't know that. That's coming from someone who's a music critic and a movie critic, as I said. But hey, if you're curious, I got the poll up there, so I'm curious if you all tell me how wrong I am. Looking forward to it. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process or help support the channel, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details right over there. You want to check my schedules on my Instagram, link down there below. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.